We are talking about Darknet markets today. That's right. We're talking about the dark and seedy side of Bitcoin. Well, Darknet markets used to be dominated by Monero. Yes, the privacy-focused cryptocurrency. But since Monero has been getting delisted from Binance recently, Bitcoin has taken a front seat in Darknet markets. Colin and I will talk about this. We'll explain how Darknet markets work, and we'll dive into some of the statistics from Chainalysis themselves about how big or really small Darknet markets are. Bitcoin Season 2 is brought to you by Arch Network, the platform building bridgeless apps on Bitcoin. More on Arch later. Let's kick it off. Before we get started, I do want to say that this is an episode where Colin and I discuss candidly topics of drugs. We mention specific drugs by name, and we talk about the details of Darknet markets. That we discuss themes which are probably not totally okay to listen around kids.
We do not endorse drug use or the use of dark web markets.
Okay!
The greasy underbelly of the internet, the dark places and insidious corners that your parents told you not to go to. And to
Garth
quote
Brooks
Bill Nye's character,
Garth Brooks has friends in low places, and if Garth Brooks were alive today, I'm just kidding, he is, he would be hanging out in the darknet markets where all of the low, seedy places are. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
And to quote Bill Nye's character from Love Actually, children don't buy drugs. Become a pop star, and they give them to you for free. But we're not talking about free drugs today. We're actually talking about drugs that people pay a lot of money for. In fact, in Chainalysis' most recent crime report, they estimate that 2024 saw about $2 billion, just north of $2 billion worth of trading volume on dark web markets. And these are the places that people go to get drugs cross-border and pay with cryptocurrencies and through an escrow system that ensures that they don't get screwed and the distributor doesn't get screwed. And there are a lot of working parts to these. We'll get into some of the details, but the real magic behind this, if you want to call it that, or the secret recipe for this, is these dark web markets are run on Tor, so they're not accessible through traditional browsers like Google Chrome or Firefox or Safari. And they use cryptocurrencies for payment because that's really the only way that you can easily transfer value and ensure payments for these goods and services. And that last part is the most important one too, because we did not see an explosion of dark web market activity until Bitcoin was starting to be used as a method of payment on these back when the Silk Road was founded in about 2010, 2011.
Yeah, so we're gonna give you a little prehistory. We did a prehistory episode on Ross Ulbricht and the Silk Road a couple months ago. So go back and listen to that episode. It's the Silk Road one on Bitcoin Season 2. But we're going to do a little prehistory. Then we're going to talk about how these darknet markets actually work. So if you've never been to one, you don't have to go. You can stay totally innocent and scot-free. Colin and I have done all the legwork for you, and we can kind of explain like how these work, some of the basic like components and dynamics. And then we will basically throw a wet blank on a lot of this and say why it's a really fun kind of seedy underbelly of Bitcoin and crypto, but it's really not that big of a slice of the pie overall. And this is demonstrating Chainalysis. So
yeah, it's a fraction.
So Colin, you are the perfect guy to talk about this, the prehistory, because you are about to drop a piece for Bitcoin Magazine on this, right?
Yeah, I've got a piece in Bitcoin Magazine's upcoming print article, which is the freedom issue. And it was it was germinated during Ross Ulbricht being freed from prison after Trump's pardon. And I wrote an article about the prehistory of the Silk Road and then a brief history of the Silk Road for the print magazine. And what most people don't realize, and I honestly didn't really realize this either until I started researching this article, is that the Silk Road was not the first dark web market. In fact, some might argue that that a forum called The Hive in the late 90s, it was a drug synthesis forum where people would go and talk about the chemistry behind maybe synthesizing something like methamphetamine, or usually it would be psychoactive drugs or something like ketamine, right? So some of these people were maybe trying to create ketamine or LSD or other drugs in a lab setting. Some might argue that that was one of the first, kind of like the precursor to all of this. I'm sure that some trading in person was facilitated on a forum like this. But the first dark web market we have that actually has a sort of market component for buying and selling online drugs was a market called the farmer's market. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is not a market for sourdough, overpriced kombucha, and organic produce.
I get up early on Saturday morning with my little basket and I go get raw milk and raw synthesized ketamine.
Maybe the ketamine's in the raw milk.
Yeah, who knows?
No, you're not buying $5 potatoes at this farmer's market unless the potato is a euphemism for a dime bag of heroin. The farmer's market itself was a precursor to the Silk Road that was founded in, let me make sure I have my thing. Yeah, it was founded in 2006 by one Mark Peter Willems, a Dutchman. Somehow it always seems to be the Dutch with these
always
things.
The Dutch.
I mean, they're really, I will say, the US has the most market share of any dark web market currently. Like, it's the majority of the trading volume. It's probably the majority of the distributors. But a lot of dark web markets, or at least the distributors and sellers, come out of like Germany, then the Netherlands. The Netherlands is kind of an easy one, right? Because you see this a lot in Colorado and in other legal states with weed. They'll just go to a coffee shop in the Netherlands and then buy pot and then sell it on the dark web and make a markup on it, right? I actually, when I was in Denver once going to the post office, I swear I ran into a guy. He had like 20 stacks of what looked like just, what would have fit like an eighth of a pound or eighth of an ounce of weed in them. And he was going through, and the dude looked high as shit, and he was wearing his.
And then you went on to Agora Market later, and you're like, "Oh, it's Weed Jesus 420. I'm going to give him a good rating."
So that's kind of a side note. And sorry for the tangent, guys. But what's funny is a lot of dark web activity for like something like marijuana now. If you go on the dark web now versus like maybe 10 years ago, 14 years ago, it would have been all homegrown stuff. But now the majority of the weed being pushed through dark web markets is actually just stuff that's legally produced and then purchased and then sold interstate over the dark web. So anyway.
Okay. So that aside, history.
Refocusing. Thank you for staying with us. We appreciate all of your patience. So the farmers market was started in 2006 by one Peter Mark Willems. It was previously called Adam Flowers before he rebranded it to the farmers market. And what it started as an encrypted email and domain service through Hushmail, which was an encrypted email service back in the day. And it was basically everything that you would expect from a modern day dark web market or like a Silk Road, right? You could go and buy acid, ketamine, marijuana, cocaine, DMT, fentanyl, psilocybin, MDMA.
All the words that get us demonetized and kicked off YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. Just the laundry list of illicit drugs, right? The thing that made it really cumbersome, though, and made it a terrible experience was the fact that for payment, buyers would use a patchwork of cash, PayPal, Western Union, and two gold-backed digital currencies that were precursors to Bitcoin, Pecunix and iGolder. I'm not exactly sure how this whole, routine would look like in terms of settling payment from buyer to seller. But the basic idea is there would be some network of you giving cash to someone who would then go deposit that somewhere else, potentially into Western Union and then send a wire, or deposit in their own bank account and then send a PayPal to someone else. Or maybe you start with the PayPal, that guy withdraws the cash from his bank, deposits it somewhere else. Eventually you get this really complex, unwieldy handoff to handoff to handoff until the money is deposited into a Pecunix or iGolder account, I believe in an offshore account in Panama. And then the money is distributed to the seller. So the reason I point this out is because go ahead, Charlie.
Well, I was going to beat you to it, which is like, the thing is, darknet markets were demanded by the people and they were very much clear thing, but they missed like the key missing piece, which is the actual payments. The transmission of money was an intractable problem until you had Bitcoin and other more free open networks. And Bitcoin kind of was this silver bullet, which unlocked this model and made it sustainable.
To give some context for that too, or just to add a little more data to this, the web of payments that the farmers market required was so cumbersome and such a pain in the ass that it never really took off. So just to give you an idea, the farmers market had only around 3,000 users at its peak, and it processed only 2.5 million in trades from 2006 to 2012. So you're basically looking at probably a handful of power users who are very dedicated and are using this for the majority of the sales on the platform, right? Now, let's put that into context with the Silk Road, whose total estimated transaction volume was 9.5 million Bitcoin, valued at 182 million at the time, by 100,000 users from between its launch in January 2011 and its closure in October 2013. So the two missing ingredients that the farmers market had, one of which it added to the secret sauce a little too late. It didn't have Bitcoin, or at least it didn't use it. Bitcoin was around before it shut down in 2010. And it was not using Tor for listings until the last year of its operations. And it's those two things that are the key ingredients for making a dark web market tick.
So for context today, if we look at the Chainalysis report on 2025 crypto crime, they estimate that 2020 to 2024, roughly the average total volume of inflows to these markets that they're able to identify ranges from about 2.5 billion to about 3.5 billion over the past 5 years. So like this is still, significant. It's still not 1 billion, but at least 2 billion every year. But what's funny is, Colin, you actually, we look at like the value of these assets, and the market has stayed actually kind of relatively flat, really, for the past many years, which this is meanwhile, while the overall cryptocurrency adoption and use continues to grow and skyrocket. So this every year on year, the absolute volume, the gross volume of all trades and inflows in these markets stays relatively the same, but it becomes a smaller piece of the pie. So just, if we're going to set trends since then, since the Silk Road, that's kind of how it's looked.
I think that's a really good point. And the question then becomes, why is that? Because you would expect that a lot of the people who are involved in dark web markets are probably exposed to cryptocurrencies, not just from a commercial standpoint, but as one of their primary investments, I would venture to say, right? A lot of these people are anarcho-capitalist leaning, probably. They have libertarian sentiments, perhaps. They believe in free trade, and they believe in unrestricted trade, and they don't want the government messing in any of their business, right? So it would stand to reason that they have exposure to cryptocurrencies as an investment medium. Now, if that's true, then you would expect this bar chart to be going in the opposite direction. This is the chart that Charlie was just alluding to. We can see in 2021, at least in the past 5 years in recent memory, you could probably argue that this is the peak in the entire history of dark web markets. I would say that's probably a fair assumption. You see total transaction value or volume peak at around 3.2 billion, 3.3 billion. And it dips in 2022, as we might expect with a bear market, pops up a little bit in 2023, but then falls to a 5-year low in 2024. And so just to kind of piggyback on what you were saying there, Charlie, the only thing that I can think of as for why that is that monitoring and busting these operations has become much more sophisticated over the past few years, and there's more risk to running them now.
Yeah, and we can get into that. So this blends into the prehistory, because so after the Silk Road was busted in 13, going into 14, you saw like a Hydra. I think even one of the darknet markets was called Hydra. You saw like a Hydra, you cut off one of the heads, and a bunch of other markets pop up. So while the Silk Road is like become the Kleenex or the like default reference for darknet markets broadly. Today you have maybe at least a dozen major ones which are active, and it's kind of like a constant musical chairs. They're always going down. They're getting seized. You're having the operators or founders like rug or get hacked or who knows, but they're just always replacing one another because it's fairly, I won't say simple, but it's,
I would say so.
Yeah,
right?
You can stand one of these up. You can copy paste one market's code, bring it over to another. You just got to onboard users, and the users.
That's the hardest thing is just user acquisition. I think
it's really just normal product development life cycle.
Yeah, so, it is for sure. And the user acquisition thing kind of solves itself, though, right? Because users are in forums on the dark web talking about these things constantly. When a new market pops up or one exit scams or gets pulled down, pretty quickly another one will step in its place. And then all of those customers, especially if it's the same operators, will flow to it. Same operators in the sense of maybe part of the website gets shut down by the feds or authorities, and then a small contingent of that operation goes and starts a new one.
Let me tell you about one of the most slept on opportunities in crypto. Arch is building fast, composable DeFi apps on Bitcoin. Arch apps tap into the OG blockchain with by far the most liquidity and best brand in crypto. I've known the team for over a year. The tech they're building is solid, and they are racing towards mainnet. There's dexes like Saturn, meme coins on funkybit.fun, instant loans on Cha-Ching, and so much more. Plus, they're rewarding testnet users, so join me in trying out Arch while it's still early. We'll get into like how some of these work, but I think one interesting thing I'll point out is sometime in the mid-2010s, after the Silk Road shut down, Bitcoin was like the dominant cryptocurrency to be used on the Silk Road and the early follow-up markets. But then sometime in the late 2010s, we began to see Monero take center stage as the preferred cryptocurrency to be used on these darknet markets.
And why? Why is that?
Why is this? And the reason is because while Bitcoin is pseudonymous, it is not anonymous. That means that we don't necessarily know the identity of the person sending the Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin transaction itself is public and it's easily traceable.
And we know the address.
We know the address.
We know which address is sending what Bitcoin to whom.
Exactly. But Monero is designed as a privacy first cryptocurrency where all of that is obfuscated and hidden. I'm in a hand wave here. But you just
I think the addresses don't show up.
Yeah. So Monero is privacy by default and natively. So as the cryptocurrency surveillance complex grew and the ecosystem got built out and these exchanges and platforms had to become much more regulated and authorities got better at tracking these things, Bitcoin itself began to be less functionally anonymous. Because previously, if you bought Bitcoin on one of these centralized exchanges, even one in the US, you may not have your identity really strongly attached to that. Then as KYC began to be implemented and regulations got to be followed, Bitcoin, as the comparatively more regulatorily friendly cryptocurrency, was functionally less private, whereas Monero, the transactions, you could buy Monero on an exchange, and then whatever you did with it off the exchange was much more difficult to tie to you. So Monero became a much more like the preferred cryptocurrency. Bitcoin, because it is the king cryptocurrency, is always going to be around. But recently, in the past few weeks or months, Monero has really been delisted on these major exchanges, notably Binance. And really, there's a twofold problem here. The exchange for the goods has to happen in a cryptocurrency, Monero or Bitcoin. But then the service, the producers and the marketplaces want to convert that cryptocurrency into the things they want. Maybe they want to keep it in Bitcoin, or maybe they want to convert it to real world things or pay for real world expenses, SG&A for your drug operation, if you will. and so like, as Monero has become difficult to offboard, it's been declining in the overall volumes on these markets, at least per the report. So Bitcoin's back on the menu now. Bitcoin is functionally a little less private, but I will toss it back to you here, Colin, to jump off of this as I see you scrolling through the report.
Yeah, so this chart right here shows a kind of an up and coming dark web market called Abacus, and its inflows or trading volume in 3 stages. One is inflows before another market called ASAP, which was XMR exclusive, closed. Inflows post XMR or post ASAP closure, and then other inflows after major centralized exchanges delisted XMR. So XMR is the ticker for Monero. Excuse me if I didn't say that earlier. So what we see here obviously is a clear trend for at least Abacus in terms of Bitcoin volume on the exchange is going up. So Abacus has the majority of its volume in Bitcoin. It still uses Monero, as some of these screenshots will show. Like you can choose to pay in Bitcoin or Monero, but the Bitcoin use on the platform is growing. I also think this screenshot is a good segue perhaps into exactly how the marketplace on these things functions.
Yeah, I think I want to limit how much screenshots we have displayed, because I don't know how thin of the ice that we are treading on here regarding terms of service of platforms. But the thing is, this is a great opportunity for Colin and I to talk to the listener about how these things actually tactically work. Like, and surprise, the short version is, it's kind of like just any Amazon marketplace. It's just a little harder to get to, and it's run by insane paranoid people.
And it looks like a 2000s 4Arrow website.
Yes, my observations, Colin. Someone who isn't me, Swim, may say that, may observe that these markets in 2025 look the exact same as they did in 2014. I think it's like nothing has changed. It is like going back in time and looking at a GeoCities website that I cobbled together as a child.
To use a really crude analogy, you know, when you go to the dime store, liquor store on your street, you know, and the linoleum is peeling and there's, you know, the guy behind the counter is chain smoking Pall Malls, and there's this accumulation of nicotine and smoke piling up on the pockmarked ceiling. And, you know, there's some guy out front panhandling or something like that. The glass is cracked. That place hasn't been updated since it was opened in the 60s, right? Because why would it? You're not getting an old fashioned at the Ritz-Carlton. You're getting a Colt 45.
You need and if you want to splurge, you buy some Red Band. Like it's the same. It's the same thing. It's wholesome. It's nostalgic.
Yeah, and so with these dark web marketplaces, just like with the dime store, liquor store at the corner store, right? You don't really have an incentive to invest in sprucing up your infrastructure because people are going to come for their cheap liquor and their cheap beer anyway. And the same thing with these dark web markets. They don't need it to look spick and span like some designer who's making $500,000 a year to make the website look really appealing to attract customers. The product sells itself. They're going to come there because this is the only place that they can get to buy really good drugs. And I will say, also Swim, someone who is not me, the quality control on these websites is pretty impressive. You can get really high quality things that would be, if not inaccessible, potentially dangerous to seek out on the street.
Yeah, so this is really interesting because, yes, it's run by a bunch of paranoid, I would say largely crazy people, but you see a culture of, dare I say it, harm reduction across. You cannot go to one of these darknet like aggregator sites without seeing like copious resources about harm reduction, because if it's a business and a more transparent business with more free flowing communication, you are seeing a lot of like self-preservation incentive embedded in the culture. Now, the other component that you don't get when you might be, say, buying drugs on the street is the whole like abundant peer review component. So like you go onto these websites and it looks like so you have to find the link. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. You have to like find out where they are. You got to download Tor browser. You got to find out where they are. You got to go to the website. But then you get there and it's kind of like, looks like an old school, V2 of eBay where you've got seller profiles and the goods they're vending. And then you have reviews. So you've got people who like actually write up reviews. I got my shipment successfully. I bought this. And then the website will say they did buy this. And then that user will say, I got it in the mail. It arrived like this, the quality was X. And it's really interesting because when you have, say, a year's worth of review history, it gives the buyer a lot of confidence, and it is, I sound a little bit like I'm advocating for it. I'm chuckling.
You can know you're buying your crack cocaine at a great price and high quality.
I think my point is that it's really fascinating of like dynamic where, yeah, you're selling stuff that is a Schedule 1 federal offense. You're going to go to prison for life distributing this maybe. But like you're seeing that a really robust system of like checks and balances, or at least reviews pop in. So like the user experience is probably much higher than it would be just going to your local corner store, your local 5 and dime liquor store down the street and going around back and buying drugs. You imagine yeah.
I think this is what really bears highlighting with all of this, is that the incentives for the entire dark web marketplace, barring a few that allow exit scams, which we'll touch on here shortly.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Are kind of perfectly aligned between all of the pieces, right? So for the buyer, they're not going to get customers if their product is crap or if it's killing people, right? And simultaneously, for the sellers, they're not going to buy from someone who has a poor reputation. And no one, the buyers aren't not lacing their drugs with things or selling crap drugs out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because they want to make money, right? And so, but the incentives are aligned there to where you actually have a high quality product in terms of it's not going to be cocaine cut with fentanyl, because if your users start buying that and they all die, no one's going to buy your cocaine, right? And going back to just the structure of these reviews, you can't spoof them. You actually have to buy the product. Now, you could buy your own product and review your stuff exclusively, but most of these markets have the ability for people to click on users and actually go through their review history. Yeah. So you can kind of suss out authenticity that way. Now, this is not like we're like talking glowingly about this process. Yeah, I'm not telling you to go out and use one of these. I do think, though, that this needs to be contextualized within the U.S.'s broader drug epidemic, because, just speaking from, personal experience, I heard a story a while back about this homeless guy who was with one of his buddies, and he was clean. His buddy smoked a joint, and it was laced with fentanyl, and he died. He didn't get the weed from a store. He didn't buy it legally. He bought it off the street. And so that creates a situation where you're not only having the white powders like cocaine cut with something like fentanyl, which is a scourge upon the American people, you also have something that you would never expect, like weed. And in a time where quality control is impossible on the streets for people, you have an alternative that allows you to actually do in-house quality control to make sure that you're not going to get something that's going to poison you. If we're going to have people using drugs, I would much rather them do something like this than buy it from someone unreliable off the street. Yeah,
and I will say that there is recent reporting on the fentanyl trend, which has affected darknet markets and distributors. But what's interesting is that we see a more public accountability and response system. So while I don't know if this has been studied, my subjective gut check and me poking around the internet researching on this topic lends me to think that it's probably less of an issue on the darknet market than it is in the meat space, the real world, on Main Street, you might say.
Yeah, 100%.
Let's get into exit scams, or just the risk here, because obviously the risks regarding illegal behavior are obvious. You use these, you're committing a crime, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, there's the federal government, police, law, you're breaking the law. There's that risk. But there's the other risk, which is probably more interesting and fun to talk about, which is these are often honeypots. If you're not familiar with the term honeypot, let's get into the mechanics of how these markets work. So the market itself facilitates the listing of vendors and they operate the markets. But the way the actual exchange of funds works is that users deposit their cryptocurrency, Bitcoin or Monero, into a wallet that the market controls. And then upon the confirmed receipt of the goods, the market releases those funds to the vendor, stands a fee. So the market makes money from the fee, but during that time, they operate as like an escrow account. And, some are a little bit different and operate differently, but largely the market will end up, if it's very successful, end up with a large escrow account of a lot of this cryptocurrency. And it can be in the tens of millions of dollars. It can be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe.
And just to zoom in on that, right? That potential honeypot will grow with your users because you will have many trades being simultaneously executed. And the escrow is not released typically until the buyer reports that they have received their product.
Exactly. And so
this could be sitting for a week, maybe a little longer or shorter, give or take, depending on how long processing and shipping takes.
Yeah. So that hot wallet, I'm going to use the term hot wallet for maybe the listener to understand. That hot wallet just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it both presents a vector to hack for an outside party, or a inside job hack, or a planned rug, if you will, from the actual operators themselves. My having been around in crypto a long time and having seen a number of rugs in NFTs and crypto scams, everything, the line between what is a planned exit, what's an outright scam can get very hairy. Sometimes people will find themselves stumbling into success and they have a lot of money, and then that rug button looks oh so juicy. And some people are only human, and when faced with $40 to $50 million and you just press a button and disappear, that presents a giant carrot for it. So that, that can be a whole thing. And also, like, these are anonymous operators generally, and this is by design. They don't want to be known. So, like, from the top down, like, users of the platform, the vendors of the platform largely are ignorant about who is operating. So there's very little recourse. And then also, this is often a subject of conspiracy and probably has been validated at some point. No, it definitely has happened. The literal feds will operate these as honeypots to capture vendors and users. I think I wish I had a source I could quote right now, but I know for a fact some of these have been honeypotted, or at least at some point the feds fly in, seize the market, and then keep operating it for a little while, and then kind of do a sting operation to get all the people who've been using it. Yeah,
I mean, the U.S. government has orchestrated coups around the world, and depending on who you talk to, may have been behind the largest sex trafficking and honeypot scandal via Jeffrey Epstein. But that's for another show.
Back in the 80s.
We're not going to go Alex Jones on y'all.
Yeah.
But it would not surprise me if they were also running some of these dark web markets. And going back to the incentives thing I mentioned earlier, this is obviously a place where the incentives are not aligned, because if you are running one of the largest dark web marketplaces and you're processing anywhere from 100 million to $1 billion worth of transactions every year, that's a huge incentive for you to take the money and run, especially, as Charlie said, you're anonymous. No one's probably going to know who you are. And also, who are they going to go to? Are you just going to shuffle up to your local sheriff's office and be like, hey, man, I just had $1 million stolen from me.
I just got screwed out by my drug dealer, man.
Yeah, man. I was selling pot on the dark web and I didn't know that was illegal, man. Can you help me? But so a few notable ones in this case, this is just to name a few. There have been some smaller ones, but some of the prominent ones that come to mind, Wall Street Market was one of the bigger ones. It had an exit scam in 2019. Empire Market in 2020, 30 million was stolen. So the hot wallets were compromised. And Incognito Market, somewhere between a $20 and $30 million exit scam. And then there are countless others. Actually, I'm not sure if the Empire Market one was an exit scam or if it was a hack. But all that being said, it's kind of like the lines are blurred with some of these too, right? Because sometimes the operators will say, we've been hacked, and then they'll just take the money and no one can really prove it one way or the other, right?
It was funny as like, the lore behind a lot of these is very deep. A lot of it's even forgotten to time because, again, these are often carried in the hearts and minds of like obscure forums, which are no longer in operation. So like a lot of the details on these are murky, but when we can do empirical evaluation. And thank God, this will be one of the first times you'll hear me say this. Thank God for Chainalysis and their report on this. In that Chainalysis does shed some light. We referred to some gleanings from the chart or from the report earlier, but Chainalysis does clarify some of the actual like stuff that's going on, and they have interesting insights about like volumes, different types of these darknet markets, their preferred names. You've got this chart right here. This shows the
top 10 darknet markets and drug shop infrastructure services. I'm not really sure what the infrastructure services piece is. Like you build a web infrastructure for people. Anyway,
maybe they're running defecting Ethereum nodes which refuse to censor. I don't know.
So the top one is the Kraken dark web market, not to be confused with the Kraken exchange, which is a very legitimate, regulated, and not a legal exchange for cryptocurrencies. But the Kraken market in 2024, dark web market, took the cake for nearly $800 million worth of trading volume. Then you followed pretty far behind by Mega at around 250 million, Black Sprute just above 200 million, and on down the list at some smaller ones like Oh My God, and Abacus. So what's just, again, bears repeating for this, I haven't been following dark web markets. I used to report on them a little bit when I was at Bitcoin Magazine, but we'll probably see a new crop next year for the largest markets, unless these stick around, obviously. But I mean, the longevity for a lot of these things is pretty short. Like you might have a year or two where you're really making it good. And then if you're around at year 3, you're like a veteran, because the feds often shut these things down very quickly. They've gotten very good because of tools like Chainalysis at hunting down these operators and shutting down the markets accordingly.
And again, when we talk about the prehistory of these, like there were other of these like privacy or types of freedom, you might call them freedom or darknet oriented tools. And so Bitcoin and crypto is just one of the dimensions here. Like you have ISPs, the internet service providers, who like log the transactions. They watch you. They work with the relevant authorities. You have the on and off ramps. You have exchanges which require KYC or can see certain things about you. You have Chainalysis, which watches the actual blockchain to track funds. And so you've got multiple dimensions here where like the prying eyes can nab you and figure out who you are. And you saw this with Ross Ulbricht. Like he had an obscure screen name that he probably forgot about, which was kind of, loosely linked to his other identity. And that's how they first figured out who he is. I imagine that's probably the case with, like most of these, busts is,
just one little slip up.
Yeah.
Like one time you don't log into your VPN and use Tor, and then your IP is linked to your location. All it takes is just one thing, right? If you don't have perfect internet hygiene, if you're running one of these things, eventually the clock's kind of just ticking away, not in your favor.
And then obligatory like reference to the possibility that some of these privacy tools, which we just kind of assume that they're private, like they may not be. And it's very hard to discern whether they're not, or to what level, or, in what way they may not be. they may not be fully anonymized. So,
and that's also a good reminder too, with something like Monero XMR, right? If you're not running a full Monero net node and sending your own transactions with XMR, it's much easier for your transactions to actually be de-anonymized by something like Chainalysis if you're using like a web wallet or something like that, because it's just one more layer that you are not adding to your transactions and makes it easier for them to peel back.
Yeah. And so while on this podcast, we try to fine line between covering our clear enthusiasm for freedom technologies and free and open markets, we also try to fine line to say, look, some of this stuff has been deemed to have clear negative consequences on society, and therefore governments are going to restrict these and have punitive approaches to them. So user beware.
User beware. If you don't want the feds to come after you, don't sell drugs on the dark web. Become a pop star and they give them to you for free.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. There's the great tie-in. I feel like we should go back and record a full top of episode disclaimer, which we will do that after we wrap this up. But
yeah, we probably should. But before we do that, I think we need to talk about a specific coin's relevance to all of this that we haven't touched on. So with Dogecoin, hey you guys!
What's up, guys? Like and subscribe. It's your boy Charlie.